My name is Hattie Richardson, and I am 67 years old. I sit in this tiny room at Sunset Manor Nursing Home watching through a grimy window as my son David drives away without even looking back. The red taillights of his BMW disappear around the corner, and I feel something breaking inside my chest. After 40 years of being a nurse, after raising him alone when his father was dying, after sacrificing everything I had, this is how it ends. But you know what? Sometimes life has a way of surprising us, even when we think all hope is lost. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and please hit that like button, because this story is going to show you exactly what real family looks like. Trust me, by the end of this, you will never take loyalty for granted again. So let us dive into how I turned the worst betrayal of my life into the greatest blessing I never saw coming. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand just how deep this betrayal cuts. For 40 years, I wore my white nursing cap with pride at Jefferson General Hospital. I walked those sterile hallways through double shifts, through holidays, through birthdays. I never celebrated because someone always needed care. My hands knew the weight of healing, the gentle touch that could calm a frightened patient, the steady presence that families depended on during their darkest hours. I married Robert Richardson when I was 22, fresh out of nursing school with dreams bigger than our little apartment could hold. He was a good man, a construction foreman with calloused hands and a heart that could melt steel. For 25 years, we built a life together, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. We bought a modest 2-story house on Maple Street with a white picket fence that Robert painted every spring, and a garden where I grew tomatoes and roses side by side. David came into our world when I was 28. Oh, how that boy lit up our lives. He had Robert's stubborn chin and my determined eyes, and from the moment he took his first breath, I knew he was destined for greatness. I would hold him in the rocking chair by his nursery window, whispering promises about all the opportunities we would give him, all the doors we would open that had been closed to us. But life has a cruel way of testing our promises. When David was 12 years old, Robert started getting headaches. At first, we brushed them off as stress from work, too many long days in the sun. But the headaches became migraines, and the migraines became something far worse. Brain cancer. Stage 4, the doctor said with the kind of professional sympathy that cuts through you like winter wind. 6 months, maybe 8 if we were lucky. Lucky, what a word to use when your world crumbles. I became a single mother while Robert was still alive, watching this strong man who could build houses with his bare hands fade away one day at a time. The medical bills piled up like autumn leaves, beautiful in their colors, but deadly in their weight. I sold my engagement ring first, then my grandmother's china, then, finally, our beautiful house with its white picket fence and carefully tended garden. We moved into a cramped apartment above Mrs. Henderson's bakery, where the smell of fresh bread could not quite mask the scent of poverty that clung to our clothes. I picked up every extra shift the hospital offered, working days, nights, weekends, holidays. David would do his homework at the nurses' station, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the soft conversations of healing. The other nurses became his aunts, teaching him to fold blankets, hospital corners tight, and showing him how to make patients smile with just the right joke. When Robert finally lost his battle, I held David's hand at the funeral and promised him that everything I did from that moment forward would be for his future. I worked 3 jobs during his high school years, nursing at the hospital, filing at a law office on weekends, and cleaning offices at night. My body ached in ways I never knew were possible, but every scholarship David earned, every honor roll certificate he brought home, every college acceptance letter that arrived, made every sacrifice worth it. David graduated summa cum laude from State University with a degree in pre-law, then went on to law school at Columbia. I was so proud I could barely contain it. I showed his graduation pictures to every patient, every doctor, every janitor who would listen. My boy, the lawyer. My boy who would never know the feeling of empty pockets or impossible choices. He found a job at a prestigious firm in the city. Married, Jennifer, a beautiful woman with a trust fund and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They bought a house in an exclusive neighborhood, the kind with gates and security guards and lawns that looked like green velvet. I visited once for their housewarming party, feeling completely out of place among people who wore their wealth like expensive perfume. After Robert's death, I moved into a small ranch house on the outskirts of town, close enough to the hospital that I could walk to work when my old Honda finally gave up completely. The house was nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen with countertops from the 1970s, but it was mine. I planted a small garden in the backyard, growing the same tomatoes and roses I had loved at our old house on Maple Street. David called every Sunday at first, our conversations lasting nearly an hour as he told me about his cases, his promotions, his plans for the future. But gradually, those calls became shorter, less frequent. Every Sunday became every other Sunday, then once a month, then only on holidays. When I called him, I could hear the impatience in his voice, the way he multitasked during our conversations, typing emails or watching television while I told him about my garden or my patients. On my 67th birthday, I sat by the phone all day waiting for his call. The sun set, and still the phone remained silent. I finally called him that evening, and Jennifer answered with that cool voice of hers. "Oh, Hattie, David is at a client dinner. I will tell him you called." But I knew from the background noise that he was home, probably sitting in his leather chair reading case files while his wife lied for him. That was the first crack in my heart, the first moment I realized that maybe all my sacrifices had created a son who felt no obligation to sacrifice anything in return. The morning it happened was absolutely ordinary, which somehow makes it even more devastating. I was in my garden wearing my old gardening gloves and humming a hymn my mother used to sing while I tended to my tomato plants. The late summer sun was gentle on my shoulders, and I was thinking about canning some tomatoes for winter, maybe making that sauce Robert used to love so much. I heard David's BMW purr into my driveway, and my heart actually jumped with joy. He rarely visited anymore, usually only when he needed me to sign some paperwork or when Jennifer insisted on keeping up appearances at Christmas. But here he was on a random Tuesday morning, and for just a moment, I let myself believe that maybe he missed me, maybe he wanted to see his mother. He walked into my kitchen without knocking the way he used to when he was a child, but there was something different about his posture, something formal and distant. Jennifer followed behind him, checking her phone and looking around my modest kitchen with barely concealed distaste. She was wearing a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her blonde hair was pulled back in one of those severe styles that rich women seem to favor. "Mom, we need to talk," David said without preamble, settling into one of my mismatched kitchen chairs. I poured coffee into my favorite mugs, the ones with little flowers that I had bought at a garage sale years ago, but Jennifer waved hers away with a wrinkled nose. "You cannot keep living alone like this," David continued, gesturing around my kitchen as if it were somehow offensive. "You are getting older, and it is not safe. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if you forget to turn off the stove again?" The stove incident. Of course, he would bring that up. 3 months ago, I had put a pot of soup on to simmer and gotten distracted by a phone call from my old nursing supervisor. By the time I remembered, the water had boiled away and the pot was scorched. It was one simple mistake that could happen to anyone but David, acted as if I had nearly burned down the neighborhood. "David, honey, I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have been doing it for 3 years now, and I am still working part-time at the clinic. My mind is sharp, my body is strong, and this is my home." Jennifer looked up from her phone long enough to exchange a meaningful glance with David, one of those marital communications that exclude everyone else in the room. She had never liked me, that much was obvious from the beginning. I represented David's humble origins, the life he had escaped, the mother who did not fit into their carefully curated world of country clubs and charity galas. "We have found a wonderful place for you," David said, pulling a brochure from his jacket pocket. "Sunset Manor. It has 24-hour nursing care activities, people your own age. You will be much happier there." Sunset Manor. The name alone made my skin crawl. I had visited nursing homes throughout my career, had seen the warehouses where families stored their elderly relatives like forgotten furniture. The smell of disinfectant, trying to mask human defeat, the endless hallways lined with wheelchairs, the vacant stares of people who had given up hope. "I do not want to live in a nursing home," I said firmly. "I want to live in my house with my garden in my community where I know everyone at the grocery store and the mailman asks about my roses." David's jaw tightened, and I saw a flash of the stubborn boy he had been when he did not get his way. "Mom, you are not thinking clearly about this. You cannot make this decision based on emotion. We have already paid the deposit and arranged for the transfer of your care. Dr. Martinez agrees that supervised living would be best for someone your age. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 15 years, and I found it hard to believe he would recommend institutionalizing me without even speaking to me first. But I also knew that David could be very persuasive when he wanted something very good at presenting facts in a way that served his purposes. It was what made him an excellent lawyer and, apparently, a manipulative son. "We will pack your essentials today," Jennifer added, speaking for the first time since her coffee rejection. "Just clothes and a few personal items. The facility provides everything else you will need." Everything else I would need. As if a lifetime of memories could be reduced to whatever fit in a single suitcase. As if my mother's cookbook and my nursing school diploma and the photo album chronicling David's childhood were just clutter to be discarded. I spent the next 2 hours watching them dismantle my life with ruthless efficiency. Jennifer folded my clothes into 2 small suitcases, while David boxed up what he deemed valuable for storage. My wedding album, my nursing awards the ceramic angel Robert had given me for our last Christmas together, all of it disappeared into cardboard boxes destined for some climate-controlled storage unit. When I tried to take my jewelry box, David intercepted me. "Mom, you will not need jewelry at Sunset Manor. I will keep it safe for you." Safe. Everything was about keeping things safe from me, as if I had become a danger to my own possessions. The drive to Sunset Manor was completely silent except for Jennifer's occasional phone calls about tennis lessons and dinner reservations. David stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if he were driving toward an execution instead of delivering his mother to what he claimed was a better life. I watched my neighborhood disappear through the passenger window, each familiar landmark a small death. Sunset Manor squatted on the edge of town like a beige brick monument to abandonment. The parking lot was filled with cars that belonged to staff, not visitors, and the landscaping looked like it had been designed by someone who hated plants. Inside the lobby was decorated in what I suppose was meant to be cheerful colors, but the artificial brightness only made the whole place feel more depressing. A woman named Mrs. Patterson, the intake coordinator, walked us through the paperwork with practiced efficiency. She had the kind of professional smile that never wavered, even when explaining that residents were not permitted to leave the grounds without permission or that visiting hours were limited to prevent overstimulation. David signed document after document, his pen scratching across papers that signed away my autonomy as easily as if I were a piece of property being transferred to new ownership. "You will love it here, Mrs. Richardson," Mrs. Patterson said as she led us down a long hallway that smelled of industrial disinfectant and boiled vegetables. "We have bingo on Tuesdays, Bible study on Wednesdays, and movie night every Friday. Some of our residents have been with us for years." Years. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. My room was on the second floor, a space roughly the size of my old kitchen with 2 single beds, 2 dressers, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. My roommate was Martha, a tiny woman with wild white hair who introduced herself by asking if I had seen her daughter lately. When I told her I had just arrived, she seemed confused and asked the same question again 5 minutes later. David hugged me goodbye, a brief, awkward embrace that felt more like a business transaction than a familial farewell. "I will call you soon, Mom," he said, but his eyes were already focused on the door on his escape back to his real life. Jennifer did not even pretend to hug me, just offered a small wave and a "take care, Hattie" that sounded like she was dismissing a housekeeper. I stood at my new window and watched them drive away David's BMW, disappearing into traffic as if I had never existed at all. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I cried until I had no tears left. The first weeks at Sunset Manor passed like a slow-motion nightmare, each day blending into the next in a haze of institutional routine and growing despair. I woke every morning to the sound of Martha talking to invisible visitors, her conversations with people who existed only in her fading memory, serving as a heartbreaking soundtrack to my new reality. Breakfast was served at 7:30 sharp in a dining room that looked like a school cafeteria, complete with long tables and fluorescent lighting that made everyone's skin look gray and sickly. The food was not terrible exactly, but it had that institutional blandness that comes from cooking for hundreds of people with the cheapest ingredients possible. Scrambled eggs that came from a powder bacon that looked and tasted like cardboard coffee that was somehow both too weak and too bitter at the same time. I sat at a table with three other residents: Eleanor, who had been a high school principal and now spent her days correcting grammar in conversations no one else could hear; George, a former mechanic who insisted that President Reagan was still in office; and Dorothy, who never spoke but smiled sweetly at everyone and carefully saved half of every meal in napkins that she stuffed into her purse. After breakfast came activities. On Mondays, we had chair exercises, led by a perky young woman named Brittany, who wore bright pink scrubs and spoke to us as if we were children. "Lift those arms high, everyone, feel the burn," she would chirp, while a dozen elderly people half-heartedly raised their hands above their heads, most of them staring into space with the resigned expression of people who had given up fighting. Tuesdays brought bingo called by Mrs. Patterson herself in a voice that could wake the dead. B7, B7, that is, B as in beautiful 7. The prizes were always the same cheap toiletries donated by local businesses or puzzle books with half the pages already torn out. I won a bottle of strawberry-scented hand lotion my third week there, and it felt like the most meaningless victory of my life. Wednesday meant Bible study with Chaplain Roberts, a thin man with kind eyes who did his best to bring spiritual comfort to a room full of people who seemed to be waiting for death rather than salvation. I had always found comfort in faith, but sitting in that circle of wheelchairs and walkers listening to the 23rd Psalm while Martha asked her dead daughter for a glass of water made me question whether God was paying attention anymore. The afternoons were the worst long stretches of empty time that crawled by with agonizing slowness. Some residents napped in their chairs, mouths open, heads tilted at uncomfortable angles. Others stared at the television in the common room, which was always tuned to game shows or news programs that none of them seemed to actually watch. I tried reading books from the sparse library, mostly romance novels with missing pages and biographies of dead presidents, but I found it difficult to concentrate when surrounded by such profound sadness. My fellow residents were not unkind, but most of them were too lost in their own confusion or depression to form meaningful connections. Eleanor would sometimes have moments of clarity when her sharp intelligence shone through the fog of dementia, and we would talk about books or current events until her mind drifted away again. George told the same stories about working on cars in the 1960s each, telling slightly different from the last, the details shifting like sand. Dorothy never spoke, but she would sometimes pat my hand during meals, a small gesture of solidarity that meant more than any conversation. The nursing staff moved through their shifts with the mechanical efficiency of people who had seen too much sadness to invest emotionally in individual residents. They were not cruel, but they treated us more like tasks to be completed than people to be cared for. Medication was dispensed at precisely scheduled intervals. Vital signs were checked with professional detachment, and personal care was provided with the kind of distant kindness usually reserved for strangers. But there was one exception: Maria Santos. Maria was different from the moment I met her. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that actually focused on your face when she spoke to you. While the other aides rushed through their duties, Maria took time to really listen when residents spoke, even when their words made no sense. She would sit with Eleanor during her confused episodes, holding her hand and speaking in gentle tones until the panic passed. She brought George pictures of classic cars she found in magazines, knowing they would make him smile. She always saved the chocolate pudding from dinner for Dorothy, who hoarded it like precious treasure. With me, Maria was especially patient. She seemed to sense that I was different from the other residents that I had arrived at Sunset Manor, not through the natural progression of aging and illness, but through abandonment. During those first terrible weeks when I spent most of my time staring out my window and wondering how my life had come to this, Maria would find excuses to check on me throughout her shifts. "Mrs. Richardson, how are you adjusting?" she would ask, and unlike the other staff members who clearly expected a polite, meaningless answer, Maria waited for a real response. She would sit on the edge of my bed, her brown eyes filled with genuine concern, and listen while I talked about my garden, my nursing career, my growing understanding that my son had essentially discarded me. 3 weeks into my stay, I was having what I can only describe as a breakdown in the common room. I had been trying to call David for 5 days straight, but he never answered his phone and never returned my messages. I was standing by the single payphone available to residents, clutching the receiver and sobbing into the dial tone when Maria appeared at my side. Mrs. Richardson, what is wrong? She asked gently, taking the phone from my hand and hanging it up. My son will not talk to me, I whispered, embarrassed by my tears but unable to stop them. I have been calling him for days and he will not even call me back. I just want to hear his voice, just want to know that he remembers I exist. Maria guided me to one of the vinyl chairs in a quiet corner of the room, away from the other residents who were watching their afternoon soap opera. She sat across from me, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, and spoke in a voice so gentle it made me cry harder. Some people do not know how to handle guilt, she said. Maybe your son is not answering because he knows what he did was wrong, and hearing your voice reminds him of that. It does not make it right, but it might explain why he is avoiding you. It was the first time since arriving at Sunset Manor that anyone had acknowledged my situation as anything other than a normal family decision. Maria saw my abandonment for what it was, and her validation of my pain felt like the first honest human connection I had experienced in months. I gave him everything, I said, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. I worked 3 jobs to pay for his education. I sold my engagement ring to pay his law school application fees. I sacrificed my own dreams so he could live his, and now he has thrown me away like garbage. Maria was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. I understand what it feels like to be disappointed by family, she said. My father left when I was 15, just walked out one day and never came back. My mother raised me and my 3 younger siblings by herself, working 2 jobs and never complaining. Some people think family means obligation, that blood is enough. But real family is about choice, about showing up even when it is hard. That conversation marked the beginning of a friendship that would change both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. Over the following months, my relationship with Maria grew from professional courtesy into something resembling a mother-daughter bond, though neither of us named it that at first. She began spending her break times with me, bringing coffee from the staff kitchen and sitting in my room while Martha napped our conversations, ranging from her childhood in a small farming community 2 hours south to my memories of nursing school in the 1970s. Maria told me about her 5-year-old daughter, Sofia, who was being raised primarily by Maria's mother, while Maria worked double shifts to make ends meet. She spoke about Sofia with the same fierce pride I had once felt talking about David, describing a little girl who could read chapter books and had already announced her intention to become either a veterinarian or a princess, depending on which career offered better opportunities for helping animals. I barely see her during the week, Maria confessed one afternoon, her voice thick with guilt. I leave for work before she wakes up, and I get home after she is asleep. Weekends are our time together, but even then I am so exhausted that I sometimes fall asleep while she is telling me about her week. I know she needs more from me, but I do not know how to give it to her without sacrificing the job that pays for her food and clothes. I recognized the impossible position she was in, the same crushing weight of single motherhood that I had carried for so many years. But unlike my situation where David's father had died and left us alone, Maria was struggling because Sofia's father had simply chosen to walk away when responsibility became inconvenient. He sent no money, offered no support, and had not seen his daughter in over 2 years. She asks about him sometimes, Maria said, staring down at her hands. Sofia will see families in the grocery store or at the park, and she will ask why she does not have a daddy like the other kids. I try to explain that some families are different, that having one parent who loves you is enough, but I can see in her eyes that she feels like something is missing. As Maria shared more about her life, I began to understand the depth of her daily struggles. She lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, the constant rumble of washing machines serving as white noise throughout the night. Her mother, Carmen, babysat Sofia for free, but was getting older and struggling with arthritis that made chasing an active 5-year-old increasingly difficult. Maria's wages at Sunset Manor barely covered rent, utilities, groceries, and Sofia's preschool expenses, leaving nothing for emergencies or improvements. Despite these challenges, Maria approached her work with a dedication and compassion that humbled me. She remembered every resident's preferences, from Eleanor's need for extra sugar in her coffee to George's fear of being left alone in the dark. She advocated for better care when she thought someone was being neglected, even though it sometimes put her at odds with her supervisors. She brought her own magazines and puzzle books for residents to enjoy, paying for them out of her meager salary, because the facility's recreation budget was essentially non-existent. I began sharing my own stories with Maria, telling her about my nursing career and the satisfaction I had found in helping people during their most vulnerable moments. I described the feeling of holding a newborn baby for the first time, the privilege of comforting families during their final moments with loved ones, the simple dignity of helping someone maintain their independence for as long as possible. "You were born to be a nurse," Maria said one day after I had told her about successfully advocating for a patient's pain medication when doctors were reluctant to prescribe adequate doses. "I can see it in how you talk about the work, how your whole face lights up when you describe helping someone feel better." "What about you?" I asked. "Have you ever thought about nursing school?" "You have all the right instincts, all the natural compassion that cannot be taught." Maria's laugh was bitter. "Nursing school costs money I do not have and takes time I cannot spare. Sofia needs me to work, not to sit in classrooms learning things I already know from watching people like you. Besides, who would hire someone like me? I barely finished high school and I have a baby at home. Schools want students who can focus completely on their studies, not single mothers who have to leave class to pick up sick kids from daycare." But I could see the longing in her eyes when she talked about nursing, the same hunger for knowledge and purpose that had driven me through my own education decades earlier. Maria had the intelligence and the heart to be an excellent nurse. She just needed someone to believe in her potential and help her find a way to achieve it. 3 months into my stay at Sunset Manor, Maria made a decision that violated every facility policy, but revealed the true depth of her character. It was a Saturday afternoon, and most of the staff had the weekend off, leaving only a skeleton crew to handle basic care. Maria was working an extra shift to cover for someone who had called in sick, and she had arranged for her mother to bring Sofia to the facility so they could spend a few hours together. I was in the common room pretending to watch television while actually eavesdropping on other residents' phone calls, hoping to hear examples of children who actually maintained relationships with their elderly parents. When Maria appeared in the doorway with a small girl clinging to her hand, I felt my heart skip in a way that reminded me of holding David when he was young. Sofia was beautiful with her mother's dark eyes and a smile that could have powered the entire building. She was wearing a yellow sundress with tiny flowers and white sandals that were clearly her best shoes, carefully saved for special occasions. Her hair was braided with colorful ribbons, and she carried a small backpack that probably contained coloring books and crayons. "Mrs. Richardson," Maria said, approaching my chair with obvious nervousness, "I would like you to meet my daughter Sofia. Sofia, this is Mrs. Richardson, the friend I have told you about who used to be a nurse." Sofia stepped forward with the careful politeness of a child who had been coached about meeting adults, extending her small hand for a formal handshake. "It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Richardson," she said in a voice that was surprisingly clear and confident for someone so young. "Mama says you know everything about taking care of people when they are sick." I took her tiny hand in mine, feeling the soft warmth of her skin and remembering with startling clarity what it felt like to hold David's hand when he was her age. "It is wonderful to meet you, Sofia," I said. "Your mama talks about you all the time. She is very proud of how smart and kind you are." Sofia beamed at this praise, then looked around the common room with curious eyes, taking in the wheelchairs and walkers, the residents napping in their chairs, the overall atmosphere of institutional care. Rather than seeming frightened or disturbed by the environment, she appeared fascinated, as if she were visiting an exotic new world. "Are all these people sick?" she asked Maria in a stage whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some of them are sick," Maria explained patiently, "but mostly they are just older and need help with things like cooking and cleaning. Mrs. Richardson is here because her family thought it would be safer for her." Sofia considered this information seriously, then looked back at me with those penetrating dark eyes. "Do you miss your family?" she asked with the devastating directness that only children possess. "Yes," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "I miss them very much." Sofia nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. "I miss my daddy sometimes, even though Mama says he was not a very good daddy." "Do you think it is okay to miss people even when they are mean to you?" The question hit me like a physical blow, this 5-year-old girl articulating something I had been struggling to understand for months. I think it is normal to miss people we love even when they hurt us, I said carefully. Love does not just disappear because someone disappoints us. For the next 2 hours, Sofia transformed the common room of Sunset Manor into something resembling actual life. She talked to Eleanor about the books she was learning to read patiently, listening while Eleanor corrected her pronunciation and praised her progress. She asked George about the cars in the magazines Maria had brought him, her questions prompting him to tell stories about his youth that were more coherent than anything I had heard from him before. She even managed to coax a few words from Dorothy, mainly expressions of delight over Sofia's dress and hair ribbons. But it was watching Sofia interact with Maria that really broke my heart open. The little girl clearly adored her mother, hanging on every word, seeking approval for every small accomplishment, radiating the kind of pure love that adults lose the ability to express. And Maria, despite her exhaustion from working double shifts, despite her worry about money and childcare and the future, lit up in Sofia's presence like a flower turning toward the sun. When it came time for Sofia to leave with her grandmother, she surprised me by wrapping her small arms around my neck in a fierce hug. "I hope your family calls you soon, Mrs. Richardson," she whispered in my ear. "Mama says sometimes people need time to remember how to be nice." As I watched them walk toward the exit, Sofia's hand securely tucked in her grandmother's weathered grasp, I made a decision that had been forming in my subconscious for weeks. Maria and Sofia were not just random people who had wandered into my life at Sunset Manor. They were the family I had been searching for without even knowing it, the connection and purpose that David's abandonment had stolen from me. That night, lying in my narrow bed while Martha talked to her invisible visitors, I began planning how to change all our lives forever. The next 6 months at Sunset Manor passed with agonizing slowness, but they were also filled with a growing sense of purpose that I had not felt since my nursing days. My friendship with Maria deepened into something that felt genuinely familial, and my connection with Sofia became one of the few bright spots in the institutional monotony of daily life. Maria began bringing Sofia to visit more frequently, always on her days off, and always with the excuse that her mother needed a break from babysitting. Sofia would arrive with her backpack full of coloring books, picture books, and small toys, transforming my sterile room into something resembling a grandmother's house. She would sit on my bed, carefully arranging her crayons by color while telling me elaborate stories about her preschool friends, her pet goldfish, and her dreams of becoming a doctor who specialized in helping animals and old people. During these visits, I began teaching Sofia things I wished I could have taught my own grandchildren, if David had ever given me the chance. I showed her how to braid friendship bracelets using embroidery floss that Maria brought from home, teaching her the same patterns my own grandmother had shown me 70 years earlier. I helped her practice reading, listening patiently while she sounded out difficult words and celebrating every small victory. Most importantly, I told her stories about my nursing career, sharing sanitized versions of my experiences that emphasized the joy of helping others and the importance of education. "Mrs. Richardson," Sofia said one afternoon while we were working on a puzzle together. "Mama says you went to a special school to learn how to take care of sick people. Do you think I could go to that school someday? I think you could do anything you set your mind to." I told her, meaning every word. "You are smart and kind and curious, which are the most important qualities for any kind of doctor or nurse. The only question is whether you will have the opportunities you deserve." Maria overheard this conversation from the doorway where she had been watching us with an expression I could not quite read. Later, after Sofia had fallen asleep curled against my side during afternoon cartoons, Maria and I talked more seriously than we ever had before. "She adores you," Maria said gently, stroking her daughter's hair. "Sofia talks about you all week, asking when she can visit again, telling everyone at preschool about her friend Mrs. Richardson, who knows everything about hospitals. I have never seen her connect with an adult the way she has connected with you." "The feeling is entirely mutual," I said. "Sofia reminds me why I became a nurse in the first place, why I chose a career dedicated to caring for others. She has this natural empathy that you cannot teach, this genuine interest in helping people feel better. With the right education and opportunities, she could accomplish amazing things." Maria was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of impossible dreams. "Sometimes I lie awake at night, thinking about everything I want to give her, everything she deserves that I cannot provide. I want her to go to the best schools, to have tutors if she needs them, to never worry about money the way I worry about it. I want her to grow up believing that anything is possible, but how can I teach her that when my own life feels so limited? What about you? I asked gently. What do you want for yourself beyond what you want for Sofia? Maria looked surprised by the question, as if she had never considered her own desires separate from her daughter's needs. I want to be a good mother, she said finally. I want to provide for her, to be present for all the important moments in her life, to raise her to be a strong, independent woman who never has to depend on anyone else for her security. Those are beautiful goals, I said, but they are about Sofia, not about you. What would make you happy? What would make you feel fulfilled as a person, not just as a mother? Maria was quiet for so long that I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to matter, she said. I want to do work that makes a difference in people's lives, not just work that pays the bills. I want Sofia to be proud of what I do, not ashamed that her mother cleans up after old people for minimum wage. And I want to stop feeling guilty about wanting more than survival. That conversation planted the seed of an idea that would grow over the following months into the most important decision of my later life. Meanwhile, my relationship with David continued to deteriorate through neglect and indifference. He called exactly once during those 6 months, a brief conversation in which he asked perfunctory questions about my health and the facility, clearly distracted by something more interesting happening in his real life. When I tried to tell him about Maria and Sofia, he interrupted to say he had another call coming in and would talk to me later. Later never came. I learned through Mrs. Patterson that David had been contacted about my care plan and had authorized whatever decisions the facility administrators thought were appropriate. He had signed papers allowing them to make medical decisions on my behalf, essentially transferring his parental responsibilities to strangers who saw me as a room number rather than a human being. The message was clear: I was no longer his problem to solve or his life to consider. The final straw came on my 68th birthday. I had not mentioned the date to anyone at Sunset Manor, partly because I did not want pity, and partly because I hoped David might remember on his own and call or visit. I spent the entire day waiting, watching the clock, making excuses for why he had not called yet. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he was working on a big case and would call that evening. Maybe he had remembered but was waiting until after business hours. By 10 o'clock that night, I had to face the truth. My only child had forgotten my birthday completely. I cried myself to sleep that night, mourning not just the phone call that never came, but the relationship that had apparently died without my realizing it. Somewhere between David's childhood gratitude and his adult success, I had become irrelevant to his life. All my sacrifices, all my love, all my hopes for our future together had been reduced to monthly payments to Sunset Manor and the occasional obligatory phone call. But even in my grief, I was beginning to understand something important. Real love cannot be bought with sacrifice or demanded through guilt. David's indifference was not a reflection of my worth as a mother or as a person. It was a choice he was making about the kind of man he wanted to be. And if he was choosing to be the kind of man who abandoned his mother in a nursing home and forgot her birthday, then maybe I needed to choose what kind of woman I wanted to be in response. The morning after my forgotten birthday, I asked Mrs. Patterson to help me contact a lawyer. Finding the right lawyer turned out to be easier than I had expected, mainly because my 40 years as a nurse had connected me to a network of professionals who understood both loyalty and betrayal. Patterson, despite her administrative role at Sunset Manor, had worked in healthcare long enough to recognize the difference between families who made difficult but necessary decisions and families who simply discarded inconvenient relatives. "You know, Mrs. Richardson," she said when I explained what I needed, "I have seen a lot of families over the years, and there is usually a pattern. The children who visit regularly, who call frequently, who involve their parents in decisions about care are usually the ones making choices based on genuine concern for safety and well-being. The children who dump their parents here and disappear are usually motivated by something else entirely." She recommended Helen Wright, a lawyer who specialized in elder care and estate planning. Helen had been a patient of mine 15 years earlier when she was recovering from a complicated surgery, and I remembered her as a sharp, compassionate woman who asked tough questions and did not accept easy answers. When Helen arrived at Sunset Manor for our consultation, I barely recognized the serious professional woman in the expensive suit as the frightened patient who had gripped my hand during her recovery. But when she smiled, I saw the same intelligence and warmth that had made her one of my favorite patients. "Hattie Richardson," she said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair in my room. "I have to say this is not how I expected to see you again. When I heard you were asking for legal advice, I assumed you needed help advocating for better care here, not planning what sounds like a complete restructuring of your family relationships." Over the next 2 hours, I told Helen everything. David's abandonment, his appropriation of the money from selling my house, his refusal to maintain meaningful contact, and most importantly, my growing relationship with Maria and Sofia. I explained that I wanted to legally adopt Maria as my daughter and restructure my will to ensure that the people who actually cared about me would benefit from whatever I had left to give. Helen listened without interruption, taking notes in a leather portfolio and occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, amounts of money, and legal procedures that had already been completed. When I finished my story, she was quiet for several minutes, reviewing her notes and considering the implications of what I was proposing. "Legally, there is nothing preventing you from doing everything you have described," she said finally. "Adult adoption is perfectly legal in this state, and you have every right to designate whoever you choose as your beneficiaries. The question is whether you have thought through all the emotional and practical consequences of these decisions." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew what she was getting at. "I mean that once you legally adopt Maria, once you change your will to exclude David entirely, there will be no going back," Helen said gently. "If David ever realizes what he has lost, if he ever wants to repair your relationship, you will have already made choices that might make reconciliation impossible. Are you prepared for that finality?" I thought about David driving away from Sunset Manor without looking back, about the months of unreturned phone calls about my forgotten birthday. I thought about Sofia calling me Grandma Hattie and Maria staying late to comfort residents who had no other visitors. I thought about the difference between the family I had hoped for and the family I had actually found. "David made his choice when he abandoned me here," I said. "Now I am making mine." The legal process took 3 months to complete, partly because of the paperwork involved in adult adoption, and partly because Helen wanted to ensure that every detail was absolutely correct. During those months, I had to be careful not to reveal my plans to anyone at Sunset Manor, except Maria herself, who was initially shocked and then deeply moved by my proposal. "Mrs. Richardson, I cannot let you do this," Maria said when I first explained what I wanted to do. "You do not owe me anything, and I have not been taking care of you because I expected some kind of reward. You have been like family to Sofia and me, but that does not mean you have to make it legal." "That is exactly why I want to make it legal," I replied. "You and Sofia have given me more genuine love and respect in the past year than my own son has shown me in the past 5 years. I am not doing this out of obligation or pity. I am doing it because you are already my family in every way that matters. The law should reflect the reality of our relationships." I also had to carefully plan how to fund Maria's nursing education without arousing suspicion. Over the years, I had managed to save nearly $60,000 from my nursing salary and Robert's life insurance policy money that David had never known about because it was in accounts he had never bothered to ask about. Helen helped me establish a scholarship fund that would cover Maria's tuition books and living expenses during her 2-year nursing program, structured as a loan that would be forgiven upon her graduation. The day Maria was accepted into the nursing program at the local community college was one of the happiest days I had experienced since entering Sunset Manor. She ran into my room, waving the acceptance letter, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment, I forgot I was a 68-year-old woman in a nursing home. I felt like the proud mother I had always wanted to be, celebrating the success of a daughter who had worked harder than anyone should have to work for a chance at a better life. "I cannot believe this is really happening," Maria said, reading the letter for the 4th time. 2 years from now, I will be a registered nurse. Sofia will have a mother she can be proud of, and I will have a career that actually matters." "You will be an excellent nurse," I told her, meaning every word. "You already have the most important qualities: compassion, intelligence, and the ability to see people as individuals rather than just problems to be solved. The technical skills can be taught, but those other things come from who you are as a person. 2 weeks later, Helen called to tell me that all the legal paperwork had been completed and filed with the appropriate courts. Maria Santos Richardson was now officially my adopted daughter, and my new will designated her as my sole beneficiary. David would inherit nothing except the knowledge that he had thrown away a relationship that could have brought meaning and joy to all our lives. All that remained was waiting for David to discover what he had lost. The confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating came on a cold Tuesday morning in February, exactly 2 months after Maria had officially become my legal daughter and 6 weeks into her first semester of nursing school. I was in the common room helping Sofia with her kindergarten homework, while Maria attended her anatomy and physiology class when Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway with an expression that told me my secret was about to become very public. "Mrs. Richardson," she said, approaching our table with obvious discomfort, "your son is here and he seems quite upset about something. He is asking to speak with you privately in my office." Sofia looked up from her coloring book, her dark eyes moving between Mrs. Patterson and me as she sensed the tension in the air. "Is everything okay, Grandma Hattie?" she asked, using the name that had evolved naturally from our first meeting. "Everything is fine, sweetheart," I said, though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I need to go talk to someone for a little while. Why do you not work on that beautiful picture you are making, and I will be back soon." I followed Mrs. Patterson down the familiar hallway, my legs feeling unsteady for the first time since arriving at Sunset Manor. Through the glass window of her office, I could see David pacing like a caged animal, his face flushed with anger and his expensive suit wrinkled as if he had dressed hastily. Jennifer sat in one of the visitor chairs, checking her phone with the same detached expression she had worn during every interaction we had ever had. When I entered the office, David whirled around to face me, his eyes blazing with a fury I had not seen since his teenage years. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he demanded, waving a stack of papers that I recognized as legal documents from Helen's office. "You cannot just adopt some random woman and give away my inheritance without even discussing it with me." The word inheritance hit me like a slap across the face. Not our relationship or the family or even your money. Inheritance. After more than a year of minimal contact, after months of unreturned phone calls and forgotten birthdays, David was here because he had discovered that his future financial security was no longer guaranteed. "Hello, David," I said calmly, settling into the chair across from Jennifer. "It is nice to see you too. I am doing well, thank you for asking. How have you been?" My sarcasm only fueled his anger. "Do not play games with me, Mother," he said, emphasizing the last word as if it were an accusation. "I know what you did. I know about this Maria woman and her kid. Did you think I would never find out? Did you think I would just let you throw away everything our family built together?" "Our family," I repeated, genuinely confused by his word choice. "David, when exactly was the last time you called me? When was the last time you visited? When was the last time you treated me like family instead of like a financial obligation?" David's face grew even redder and he began pacing again, his agitation filling the small office with negative energy. "That is not the point," he said. "You are not thinking clearly. You have been manipulated by someone who saw a lonely old woman and decided to take advantage. This Maria person probably planned this whole thing from the beginning." Jennifer finally looked up from her phone long enough to participate in the conversation. "David is right, Hattie," she said in that cool, dismissive tone I had learned to hate. "This woman has obviously been grooming you, probably telling you exactly what you wanted to hear so she could get access to your money. You need to reverse these decisions before it is too late." The suggestion that Maria had manipulated me was so absurd, so completely opposite to the reality of our relationship that I almost laughed. "Maria did not even know I had any money until I told her about the adoption plans," I said. "She tried to talk me out of it, actually. She said she did not want me to feel obligated to help her just because we had become close." "Close," David practically spat the word. "Mother, you have known this woman for less than 2 years. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You cannot just replace me with some stranger because you are feeling emotional." "Flesh and blood," I repeated softly. "Is that what you think this is about, David, when Robert was dying, when we had no money and no insurance and no hope?" Did I abandon him because things got difficult when you needed help with college expenses? Did I tell you to figure it out on your own because I was tired of sacrificing? When you were struggling in law school, when you called me crying because you thought you might not be smart enough, did I hang up and change my phone number? David stopped pacing, his anger momentarily replaced by something that might have been shame. For just a moment, I saw a flash of the boy he had been, the child who had needed me completely and without reservation. That was different, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. You were my mother. That was your job. And you are my son, I replied. But apparently that job has an expiration date. I opened my purse and pulled out a folder that Helen had prepared for this exact moment, containing copies of all the legal documents that had formalized my new family structure. Maria Santos Richardson is now my legal daughter, I said, placing the papers on Mrs. Patterson's desk. Sofia Richardson is my granddaughter. My will has been updated to reflect these relationships. You are welcome to contest any of this legally, but Helen assures me that everything was done correctly and will hold up in court. David grabbed the papers and scanned them quickly, his legal training allowing him to understand immediately that I had covered every possible angle. You cannot do this, he said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. I am your only child. You deserve exactly what you have given me, I interrupted, which is nothing. Maria and Sofia see me as family because they choose to, not because they have to. They spend time with me because they enjoy my company, not because they feel obligated. They care about my happiness and my well-being because they love me, not because they are waiting for me to die so they can inherit my money. The truth of that last statement hung in the air like a noxious cloud, and for the first time since entering the office, David seemed to understand what he had lost. His anger dissolved into something that looked almost like panic, the realization that he had gambled on my unconditional love and lost. Mom, he said, and for a moment his voice carried the same vulnerability it had when he was small. Please do not do this. I know I have not been the best son lately, but I can change. We can work this out. You do not have to choose strangers over your own family. David, I said gently, Maria and Sofia are not strangers. They have been my family for over a year while you have been treating me like an inconvenient responsibility. I am not choosing them over you. I am choosing people who actually want to be part of my life. Jennifer stood up abruptly, her patience with the emotional drama clearly exhausted. This is ridiculous, she announced. David, we have better things to do than argue with someone who has obviously lost touch with reality. Let the lawyers sort this out. But David seemed frozen in place, staring at the legal documents as if they were a death sentence rather than adoption papers. What about everything I have done for you? He asked desperately. What about putting you in this nice facility, making sure you have good care? You mean dumping me here so you would not have to deal with me anymore? I asked. David, if you had wanted to ensure I had good care, you would have talked to me about options, included me in decisions about my own life. Instead, you made choices based on what was convenient for you, not what was best for me. Security arrived at that moment, called by Mrs. Patterson, when David's shouting had begun to disturb other residents. 2 guards stood in the doorway waiting to see if their intervention would be necessary. David looked around the office as if seeing it clearly for the first time, taking in the institutional furniture, the motivational posters about aging gracefully, the overall atmosphere of a place where people were stored rather than treasured. This is not how I wanted things to be, he said, finally his voice barely above a whisper. Then, you should have made different choices, I replied. But it is too late now, David. Maria and Sofia are my family. They have earned that place through love and loyalty and simple human decency. You had the same opportunity, and you chose to waste it. David left that day without saying goodbye, Jennifer following him with an expression of relief that she no longer had to pretend to care about her husband's difficult mother. I watched them through Mrs. Patterson's window as they got into David's BMW and drove away, probably for the last time. When I returned to the common room, Sofia was still working on her coloring book, but she looked up at me with those wise, dark eyes that seemed to see far more than a 6-year-old should have to see. Was that your son? She asked quietly. Yes, I said, settling back into my chair beside her. Sofia considered this information carefully, then reached over and patted my hand with the same gentle gesture Dorothy used when she was trying to offer comfort. "I am sorry he made you sad, Grandma Hattie," she said, "but you still have us." "Yes," I said, feeling a peace settle over me that I had not experienced in years. "I still have you." 1 year later, I am sitting in the backyard of a small house on Elm Street, watching Sofia chase butterflies while Maria studies for her final nursing exams at a picnic table covered with medical textbooks and highlighted notes. The house is nothing fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom cottage with a front porch and a garden where I can grow tomatoes and roses again, but it feels more like home than anywhere I have lived since Robert died. The transformation of our lives began 6 months after David's final visit to Sunset Manor, when Maria graduated from nursing school with the highest grades in her class. She was immediately hired at Jefferson General Hospital, the same place where I had spent 40 years of my career, and the irony of that connection felt like a gift from the universe. Her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Chen, had been a resident during my final years at the hospital, and she remembered me as a mentor who had helped her navigate the challenges of being a young woman in a demanding profession. "Your daughter is extraordinary," Dr. Chen told me during Maria's graduation celebration. "She has the technical skills and the emotional intelligence that we look for in our best nurses. But more than that, she has a sense of purpose that you cannot teach. She understands that nursing is not just about medical procedures, it is about human dignity and compassion." Maria's success allowed us to move out of Sunset Manor and into this little house, where Sofia has her own bedroom decorated with pictures of animals and posters of female doctors and veterinarians. She is thriving in first-grade reading at a third-grade level and asking questions about science and medicine that sometimes stump even Maria. Her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, called last week to say that Sofia had announced to the class that she wanted to be a nurse-doctor-veterinarian when she grew up, and had proceeded to explain the difference between various medical specialties with the confidence of someone who had been listening to dinner-table conversations about healthcare for the past 2 years. "That child is going places," Mrs. Johnson said. "She has the kind of curiosity and determination that usually leads to great achievements. Whatever you and her mother are doing, keep doing it." As for David, I have heard nothing from him since that terrible day in Mrs. Patterson's office. Helen tells me that he made inquiries about contesting the adoption and the will changes, but ultimately decided that the legal costs would outweigh any potential benefits. The lawyers he consulted apparently told him what Helen had already told me, that competent adults have the right to make their own decisions about adoption and inheritance, regardless of what their biological children might prefer. I do not spend much time thinking about David anymore, though I cannot say I never wonder what might have happened if he had made different choices. Sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet and Sofia is asleep in her room, I find myself imagining a different version of our story, one where David recognized his mistakes and worked to rebuild our relationship. One where Sofia had both a loving grandmother and a caring uncle who appreciated the gift of family. But I have learned that you cannot force people to value what they have, and you cannot make someone love you by sacrificing pieces of yourself until there is nothing left to give. David chose his path when he chose convenience over connection, when he decided that his mother's well-being was less important than his own comfort. I chose mine when I decided that love should be mutual, that family should be based on choice rather than obligation, and that it is never too late to find the relationships that feed your soul. Maria comes home every evening with stories about her patients, her voice filled with the same satisfaction and purpose that had sustained me through 4 decades of nursing. She talks about the elderly man who cried when she took the time to really listen to his concerns about the new mother who needed reassurance that she was capable of caring for her baby, about the teenager who was scared about an upcoming surgery, until Maria explained exactly what would happen and how she would be there to help. "I finally understand what you meant when you said nursing was more than a job," Maria told me last night as we were cleaning up after dinner. "Today I helped a woman who was dying say goodbye to her family, and I realized that I was not just providing medical care. I was witnessing one of the most sacred moments in human experience, helping someone transition with dignity and peace. That is not something everyone gets to do." Sofia listens to these conversations with rapt attention, absorbing lessons about compassion and service that will shape her understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. She has started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, helping to socialize cats and dogs who need extra attention, and she talks about her future career plans with the kind of certainty that suggests she has already found her calling. Grandma Hattie, she said yesterday while we were planting bulbs for next spring's garden, do you think animals and people need the same kinds of care when they are sick? What do you think? I asked, using the same technique I had used with nursing students who needed to develop their critical thinking skills. Sophia considered the question seriously, her small hands carefully patting soil around a tulip bulb. I think they both need medicine and bandages for their bodies, she said slowly, but they also need someone to be gentle and patient with them when they are scared. Animals cannot tell you what is wrong with words, so you have to pay attention to other things like how they are breathing or whether they want to eat. But people sometimes cannot tell you what is really wrong either, especially if they are embarrassed or afraid. The wisdom of that observation coming from a 7-year-old who had learned about compassion by watching the women who loved her brought tears to my eyes. Sophia is growing up with an understanding of empathy and service that many adults never develop, and I know that whatever path she chooses, she will make a positive difference in the world. As the sun sets over our small garden, casting golden light across the flowers Robert would have loved, and the vegetables that will sustain us through another winter, I am filled with a contentment I never expected to find at this stage of my life. I am 70 years old, living with my chosen family in a house that fits us perfectly, surrounded by love that was freely given rather than extracted through guilt or obligation. Family is not always about blood, I have learned. Sometimes it is about finding people who see your worth when others have forgotten it. Sometimes it is about recognizing that love is a choice we make every day, not a debt that can be collected through sacrifice. Sometimes it is about understanding that it is never too late to start over, to build something new and beautiful from the ashes of what you thought your life was supposed to be. Maria calls from the kitchen that dinner is ready, and Sofia abandons her butterfly chase to help me gather the gardening tools. As we walk toward the house together, 3 generations of women who chose each other deliberately and completely, I think about the story I would tell if someone asked me about the most important decision I ever made. I would tell them about the day I stopped waiting for my son to remember how to love me and started building a family with people who already knew how. I would tell them about Maria, who saw an abandoned woman and chose to offer friendship without expecting anything in return. I would tell them about Sofia, who taught me that grandmother love can bloom at any age between any people who are willing to tend it with care. And I would tell them that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst betrayals, that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover what you actually need. David gave me the gift of abandonment, though he never meant it as a gift. By leaving me at Sunset Manor and walking away from our relationship, he freed me to find the family I was always meant to have. Maria and Sofia are not consolation prizes for the son who disappointed me. They are the completion of a story I did not know I was writing, the answer to a prayer I did not know I was praying. Before I go, let me ask you something that this whole experience taught me to ask. Who in your life shows up for you without expecting anything in return? Who chooses to love you not because they have to, but because they want to? Those are the people worth treasuring, worth celebrating, worth building your life around. Do not wait for perfect relationships to find you. Create them with the people who are already showing you who they are through their actions rather than their words. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear that family comes in many forms, that love is always a choice, and that it is never too late to start over. Hit that like button if you believe that real family is built on love and loyalty rather than blood and obligation. Subscribe for more stories about finding hope in unexpected places and building beautiful lives from broken pieces. And leave me a comment telling me about the people in your life who chose to love you when they did not have to. I would love to hear about the families you have built or found along the way. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your own story is still being written. Make sure you are writing it with people who appreciate every chapter.